Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. I'm Cypher, and this is the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. Welcome back. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about morals, about our value judgments, and about how and why we make them. Specifically, I want to talk about which morals are worth fighting for, and this is going to be different from person to person. Now, fighting can mean going out and standing up for a cause, getting petitions signed, but I also mean it in a more literal sense. What morals would cause you to take physical action against or for another person? Now, for some people, the rare true pacifists among us, that answer is none. That they have no morals that would lead them towards taking physical action against another person. But for the vast majority of people, there is a line in the sand, whether it's defending themselves or somebody they love or even a stranger, at which point they will stand up and, well, make a physical defense against certain actions. That being said, there are two variables that come into the equation. One is severity, so the more severe an action is against your morals, the more likely you are to take action against it. And the other is proximity. So the farther removed you are from an event, the less likely you are to care enough to take moral or, physical action. So, for example, if you saw a fight breaking out in your front yard, what would you do? I mean, most people would call the police. A lot of people would go out and get personally involved, either try to get the fight off their property, find out why the fight was taking place, at least prevent any of their property from being damaged. But what if it's in the street just outside your property? I think you'd find that a much, much lower percentage of people would be interested in getting involved. Oh, sure, a lot of people would still call the cops, but there are a lot of other people out in that street watching the fight. One of them probably already called the cops, right? And why get involved? They might want you to be a witness, and you've got other things to do. So, even just a difference of a few feet in separation can cause people to have a drastically different moral response to an otherwise identical situation. So, picture that you found out that girls in your area were being groomed by groups, gangs you could say, of men, drugged with heroin and other drugs, and very, very frequently raped, sometimes gang raped, and often by many different men. You, I think, if this were happening in your community, would probably feel some sort of moral duty to get involved, to take steps against this, at least to, spread awareness. Or what about if people of a certain religion, or maybe all religions, were being taken away and put into reprogramming camps because the government didn't like that they believed in an invisible sky wizard? What if they were having their organs harvested in living conditions that are similar to, well, ones we haven't seen since World War II? How close would this need to be happening to you before you felt the need to get involved? Because if next door to your town, if the town, just across the way from yours, just across the river from where you live, had rules where women were basically kept as chattel, where they weren't allowed outside without a male companion, and where in court multiple women had to testify in order to equal the testimony of a single man, literally valuing female lives as lower than male lives, you would probably spread some awareness. You might start a petition, and if that town refused to change their ways, eventually, if this were happening in America or in most of the Western world, the government would step in and forcefully change their laws, make them start treating people with some basic human decency. Well, or at least that's what you'd think. See, the first example I gave of girls being systemically groomed and raped is actually something that's going on not in America, but in the Western world, and possibly in America at this point, with how long it's been happening in Britain, and with how much the authorities have done to hide this fact. Because, well, the rapes are being committed by a specific demographic, and they didn't want to harbor racism in the community by actually prosecuting these crimes. So in many cases, even though the police have known that these men were raping many girls, they've turned a blind eye and done nothing, which is still very different than many other countries like China, where the Muslims are being held in concentration camps, my second example, and according to many reports, having their organs harvested, along with many other horrifying atrocities. Or Saudi Arabia and most of the Middle East, where women are not considered equals to men and face truly horrific human rights violations, as do in many of those countries the men, who are in some cases forced to pay for an arranged marriage, so they don't get to choose who they marry, and then have to dish out money for a wife who will have to do their bidding, but may not be someone they're interested in spending the rest of their lives with. So it's really in everyone's best interest if these human rights violations come to an end. And if it were your next door neighbor, the town next door, or if you're an American, even the state or county next to yours, you or most of your community would probably be doing something proactively to take a stand against these, up into including the use of force, usually militaristic force, to make them have some basic human decency. So I guess the question here is, should our morals have borders? They clearly do. The farther something is away, the less likely you are to be upset or take a stand about it. But while there is an upside to having a strong community, the more interconnected we become with how fast information spreads these days, the more it becomes necessary, whether we like it or not, to start looking at the world as our community. Now, this does mean that at a certain point, as people and nations come closer together, that one moral code will inevitably end up start dominating the others. Right now, that was kind of supposed to be the UN's perspective, to have a bunch of civilized countries get together and come up with rules that would have an impact on the world. But largely, they've been ineffective, and at the best of times they've been slow to get anything done when they do accomplish anything. Now, right now, if we're looking at it realistically, the only group, the only organization with the power to implement morals on other countries, if they chose to do so, would be the United States of America. We have an army that arguably, depending on the models you look at, could go to war with the rest of the world and win. Our Navy is, I believe, larger than the next 8 navies combined, or maybe that's the military, and our military technology outstrips most of those countries. Now, I'm not saying that our first step should be to go to war to fix these moral issues. No, there's trade sanctions and other options, but at a certain point, if those don't work, well, back to the question, should our morals have borders? Should we turn a blind eye to mass atrocities affecting millions or maybe billions of people in other countries and other parts of the world just because we don't necessarily have any direct authority over them? At what point do we look back to the most overused phrase to come out of comics? With great power comes great responsibility. Well, right now, the greatest power in the world is America. So, with that power, we certainly could be argued to have the most responsibility to not just secure things within our own country, but to do what we can to help secure the rights of people in other countries. Now, I don't want to see us just go in and take over, basically make other countries into states and, implement our federal rules across the board. I don't think that America is a moral bastion that is 100% better than anywhere else in the world. I do, however, think that overall, comparatively, our morals are strong. We believe in individualism. We are, in my opinion, not an overly bigoted nation, no matter what Twitter will have you believe. Less than 2% of people in America are on Twitter. And if you go around and talk to people in the real world, most Americans I find that I talk to, whether we agree politically or not, have a strong moral basis for everything that they believe in. So, do I think that we're the right country to start taking a stand against the massive atrocities which are being committed in much of the rest of the world? Yes. And more than that, I think that we might have a responsibility, and in some cases, arguably, a duty to do something about it. More than that, another thing that we don't look at with our morals is how the things that we believe will affect the future. We need to start taking a longer term approach to the application of our morals. So rather than just stopping the crime you see in front of you today, rather than just prosecuting the rapist right now, we need to start looking to the future and doing things to prevent that from happening again. Now, in America and in most of the Western world, we've taken preventative measures and continue to take preventative measures to try and keep this kind of mentality out of our community. The problem is we also like our immigration, and for good reason. I think diversity of thought is one of our biggest strengths as a country. However, this does mean that as long as these human rights violations are commonplace in other parts of the world, as long as they're not just pushed by the government, but believed by the people to be core aspects of the human condition, we will always face these problems from outside of our borders, as long as we allow other people in. And I don't think that we should just completely isolate and cut off sections of the world. And I don't think that we should cut off sections of the world because they have moral rights infractions, because that keeps people who are suffering from those injustices from being able to escape into our country and into, Britain and other countries that, for the most part, don't have overreaching civil rights just atrocities on their law books. They might happen from time to time, but it's not a dedicated part of the foundation of our country or of most of Europe the way that it is of most of the Middle East and a good part of Asia. So yes, I think America is the right country to start taking the lead morally. No, I don't believe we're perfect, but yes, I do believe we might need to start looking at externalizing our morals, at removing the borders on our value judgments, and doing something about these atrocities being committed by governments all around the world against millions or billions of people. At a certain point, it's in our best interest, in the best interest of our future, to stop these human rights violations from becoming commonplace by population, the majority of the world in some cases, because eventually it will spread back to us if we let it continue. And with population rates dropping in the Western world and continuing to rise in most third world countries, we may see their ideologies start to take over ours with little that we can do about it if we don't take a stand against these while we do have the upper hand. Now, I've, for most of my life, been completely against military intervention, and I can't believe that I'm tentatively arguing for the possibility of it now. But at a certain point, we need to start realizing that the things we see, the things that happen right in front of us here in America, those aren't and never will be the worst things happening in the world. Those are happening in countries that don't care about their people, that don't care about rights, because Americans disagree about what constitutes a right and about what rights we should have. But we all believe that people should have some form of liberty or rights. Maybe not all, but most of us do. Whereas most people in China believe that the government should have control. They've been basically born and bred and raised to believe that, and so they do. They're not looking for an answer. They're not trying to find out which rights we all need. They're trying to find out which ones they can keep bottled up forever, while we look for a real solution. But hey, that's just my opinion. Make sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Sorry for the wait on the video. I'm going to try and get these out at least monthly and eventually, hopefully, weekly. As always, I'm your host, Cypher. Thanks again for watching the Devil's Advocate Debate Club.